Okay, and everyone should see the screen. And with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So first of all, thank you for everyone attending. I do want to make a quick mention also at the very beginning that the sponsors for this course, one is Bickmore Risk Services, which allows me to use their facilities to basically host the webinar, as well as their GoToMeeting account are allowing me to do that. I am a former Bickmore employee, so I do have some connections with them, and I appreciate their support to allow me to do this and help advance the risk management as well as enterprise risk management thought leadership. The other sponsors, actually, Christina Narvez, actually, who's our one of the co-instructors with ERM Strategies, is also, obviously helping out, giving of her time to do this, as well as actually, very importantly, the Sacramento RIMS chapter actually gave a large donation to help continue this, because we do this on our own time with the idea of really promoting risk management. And so I do want to certainly acknowledge the Sacramento RIMS chapter for their donation to basically allow us to continue to do it and to host the hosting fees associated with the website and those type of things. So a big thank you to that group, as well as National Safety Management Society and the Public Schools Risk Management Institute as well. So with those out of the way, before we go into the how we'll do some of the format, I do have a hand raised, so let me see who raised their hand. Okay, Cindy. Actually, Cindy, you're unmuted.
I just wanted to thank you for the shout out for our chapter. I didn't expect that, so just wanted to say thank you. And please, we really appreciate your providing this and are happy to support your efforts.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you very much. And Mike, I see your hand up, but unfortunately you don't have a link that says you have an audio link, so I can't unmute you or have you up there. So sorry about that. So with that, we'll go ahead and I think I make sure I did mute everyone again. So we'll go ahead and get started. So Christina, if you want, I'll go ahead and have you talk a little bit about yourself and your background, and then we'll start talking a little bit about the exam. Christina, are you muted? Uh-oh. Now I lost my co-presenter. Oh, there you go, Christina. Uh-oh.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Now I can hear you. Okay, go
ahead. Can you
hear me? And by the way, just so you know, Christina's actually in Utah.
Oh.
So.
Yeah, I'm corresponding from Utah. My name is Christina Narvez, and I'm president and CEO of my own ERM consulting firm called ERM Strategies. I used to be a Bickmore Risk Services employee, and that's how I know ERIC. And my background is I have a degree in environmental risk management from the University of Utah and an MBA from Westminster College. And my former risk management experience is I worked in the risk management departments of both Utah Transit Authority and Zions Bancorp. And then I worked for Bickmore, and then I started my own consulting firm.
Excellent. And obviously I have my stuff on the ARM study group information, but basically I started with, originally was with Rayleigh's and started more in the safety field, went over to Bickmore Risk Services and was much more in risk management and self-studied for the risk management course, and basically was able to pass those. And then eventually, after, since I guess got recruited, did some work for the University of California, and filled in as the interim director of EH&S, and eventually was appointed a career staff position as the permanent system-wide director of environment, health, and safety. The reason why I do this, I mentioned it, is really to advance risk management for my own as an EH&S professional. I strongly believe in that really the best safety people are the ones that understand risk management, and the best risk managers are the ones that understand safety. And so my original intention was really to advance it for the safety professional, and but at the same time, as I've come to learn that a lot of risk managers, either through the budget issues or things like that, didn't have an opportunity. I used to teach for the Insurance Educational Association, and that's actually where this all got started, was because there wasn't enough students, and they had to keep on canceling classes. And one of those I know is Ash Chaudhry, who's also on the taking this ERM course from University of the Pacific. And so I ended up starting to do it and expanded to start doing a webinar. And then it just made sense to just make a website and try to make it available so we can make professional development as free as possible. Obviously, the book is not cheap, but that's pretty much it in a nutshell. The only other thing I guess I would add is that with the University of California, enterprise risk management is a key focus of the university. So I basically live it and breathe it every day. And what I can tell you is, for the most part, what is covered in the book is pretty much what we do. It's pretty accurate. There's some things more on the financial side that the book covers, but there's some nuances here and there. But I think I'll be able to share some of those experiences with the university environment, and that'll help maybe have some more anecdotal type of evidence that'll help support what the classroom instruction is. So going to the exam, one of the things that is for the schedule, it's on the website, is you go to the Institute's website and you can register for the exam. The next testing window is October, there's a current one, but then the next one's October 15th through December 15th. If you are looking to take the exam, that would be the testing window I would encourage you to do. And the cost to sit for the exam is $270. Unlike the ARM exam, which is multiple choice, this is more of an essay question, and we'll be able to do that. And I have a hand raised, so Maria, you're on. Go ahead. You have a question?
What's the exam for?
Oh, for the ERM exam? So that's correct. So for those, if you have an ARM designation, you can actually you would be able to add an E to the end, so you'd have another additional kind of certificate. So you'd have an ARM-E. So if you can basically take what's called the ERM 57 exam, which is a 3-hour exam, and it kind of mentions 6 to 8 short essay questions. And then I'll have Christina talk a little bit more specifically the types of questions you can expect and what the format is. But essentially, once you pass that exam, if you don't have an ARM, you'll receive a certificate for completion of it. But if you do have your ARM, you can also add another initial after your name for your designation.
And may I add, Eric, you can do the ERM 57 exam first. And also, if you're working on your CPCU, it is now a class, an elective class you can take. And so you would only have to take 7 more to get your CPCU if you wanted to get your Chartered Property Casualty Underwriter designation also.
Thanks for, I was going to say we have to be careful of some acronyms, but thank you. Do you want to talk a little more about the exam?
Oh, do you want me to talk a little more about the exam? Okay, I've taken the exam. Oh, do you want me to kind of give an overview of it?
Yes, please.
Okay. I took the exam. I actually took it twice. I took it in September, and I was very close, but I didn't pass. And I took it again in December, and I got in the 80, 89 range, percentile range. And basically, as what you see online, what you see on the screen, it's 6 to 8 short answer questions in the beginning, Part A. And then Part B is a little more extensive. It's 4 to 5 comprehension application case studies. So like you'll read a case study and then they'll have, anywhere between 4 or 5 little short answers for that case study. And you have 3 hours to take the exam, and my best advice to you is to leave more time, maybe 45 minutes for the first part, 30 to 45 minutes, and the rest of the time you need to spend on Part B, which is the essay questions.
Okay. Thank you. And the other part, I guess, because of the way the format is different on this exam compared to the ARM, for those that have done the other courses, most of the information we're going to share is probably going to be more foundational type of information, so you can relate to it. Because with an essay, you basically have to demonstrate understanding, whereas with the ARM, a lot of it could just be memorization of different key terms and things like that. So instead of trying to focus more, like I said, on the memorization portion, it's really going to be focusing on, do you really understand the concept of enterprise risk management to be able to answer those type of essay questions? And so it's a little more interactivity from that standpoint. Mm-hmm. As far as the schedule that we have, I sent it out through the email, but also for those online, if you have not seen it, this is our plan of what chapters we're going to cover and when. As you'll notice, chapters 4 and 9, we'll cover those just in one class. And that's just because they're longer chapters, they're more in depth, and so we're going to spend a little more time on those and make sure that, because that's, again, to make sure you understand the concepts to be able to pass the exam. The last class on October 13th, chapters 14 and 15, it's really reviewing more of a case study. And so some ways it'll be more of a review session for it. In the past, I'd had a separate class just for review sessions, but this one's kind of built in to it as well. There is a possibility, because life does happen, and since things that may come up, but with having both Christina and myself doing it, hopefully we won't have to cancel or have a class moved to a later date. But sometimes something might happen to, whether it's a back to school night or other type of thing, that might get in the way of that. So, so I appreciate your understanding when we do have to cancel a class or if there's emergencies that come up. But we do try to give plenty of notice, especially since October 15th is that first testing window. So, again, how to make the most of this review. Actually, we already mute the phone, so you don't have to worry about that. We've already sent out the slides, so don't worry about copying all the information on there. You should already have that. We do try to get the slides out at least a couple days before the class. Actually, Christina, since she's already taught this class with Utah RIMS, has them all done, and so we're making some minor modifications to them. So we may be able to get them out a lot sooner on that. Again, questions, we certainly want to be able to answer all your questions and appreciate your feedback when you do that. And someone was asking if we do cancel class, it will be rescheduled. So basically, if we do cancel a class, we'll kind of bump the schedule down one more week. So yes, we'll absolutely, we'll make sure that we cover all the information when we do cancel a class. Thank you for the question. And again, our goal is to really cover all the chapters in 10 weeks, so average 2. And really the primary purpose is we want to make sure that you're prepared to pass the national exam. For those that may not are planning to take the exam and they're just more interested in getting the information on ERM, that's fine too. I think that's it'll be very helpful for you. Okay, and again, and if some people have asked if they miss a class, do they need to cancel or unregister? Absolutely not. By doing the registration, it just means you're on the email list, so I can get you the information that much quicker. And you'll receive the emails and notifications. If you unregister, then you're not going to get it, but you just be able to go to the website. So, when studying the material, what I generally encourage people to do is, educational objectives, terms, those type of things. To kind of, if you do have the course guide, it's not required, and there's some sample questions that might make it helpful. We'll be doing a lot of that review anyways as part of it, and doing some sample test questions that we'll actually send out to everyone as part of the course. As far as reading the material, though, what I would do is read the educational objectives, read the main part of the text, and read the summary. And then for actual studying for the exam, what I tend to do is anything that's in after I read the summary at the end is to go back and take a look at what's in the chapters. Because typically if they're mentioning those key concepts again, those are most likely going to be on the exam. So that's the one way, at least the way they structure the book, I think it makes it fairly easy to study.
And also, Eric, tell them that we'll send out a practice exam in the next week or two, a practice ERM 57 exam, so they can kind of see how the questions are set in the exam.
Okay. So as far as objectives, which is right from the book here, and Christine and I have gone back and forth, and I keep on forgetting who's going to start off on this. Is this me?
Okay, I'll start off on this. I'll start
okay.
There. Okay. The objectives of Chapter 1 go as follows. I'm going to go over Objective 1, which is to explain how an organization can improve its strategic decision-making by incorporating enterprise risk management. And then ERIC will cover the next 3 objectives, which are contrast traditional risk management in ERM, explain why ERM is an effective approach to use to face business uncertainties, and then 4th, summarize the major risk management frameworks and standards. Next slide. A little delay here. Okay, I think I'll just, is there a little delay? Okay, we're having a little technical difficulty here.
Okay,
Trying to advance the next slide.
What's up?
Okay, here we go. Okay, improving strategic decision making. ERM improves the organization's strategic decision making by producing high quality information that is essential to the organization's survival. Now, strategic planning is the process by which an organization's board and executive team develop, refresh, and refine its strategies in line with its view of the future. And the reason for developing a strategic plan is the recognition that an organization's current business model may not be able to survive forever or indefinitely. An organization that is able to incorporate ERM into its strategic planning process improves its decision-making in several ways. One is it can address potential devastating threats. Two, it can exploit opportunities by incorporating them into the current business model or completely reinventing a new model that will successfully carry it into the future. And third, it can use ERM as a process to manage unwanted variations from expectations. Okay. Let me get the next slide.
Got it.
Okay, here. Now I'm going to go over just briefly these benefits of using ERM, and ERIC's going to go into more detail in the presentation, but just basically, enhancing decision making. By doing that, the ERM allows decision makers to see the total risk picture, okay? Increasing profitability, well, ERM helps monitor systematic risks which could impact your bottom line. Reduce volatility, by understanding your risk better, you can have sufficient capitalization to allow for any increase in cost of risk. 4, improve your ability to meet strategic goals. Well, you can do that because now everybody in your organization is involved in ERM and understanding the risk exposures. Increase management's accountability, and we're going to talk about this in a later chapter, but by setting risk champions or risk owners, they become responsible for the risks in their department or unit. You're breaking silos, and what I mean by that is you're seeing risk from a holistic approach, and you're not just seeing it in the finance department or the legal department. You're seeing how risks affect the whole enterprise. Develop business continuity. You'll set mitigation plans that will optimize both your risk controls and your ability to take on risk. And I wanted to show an example here from United Grain Growers. Now, United Grain Growers is a Canadian grain company, and in about 1999, the CFO of United Grain Growers, Peter Cox, hired an ERM consultant to help them implement an enterprise risk management program. And I want to share with you what United Grain Growers did to reduce their volatility and increase their profitability. Those were their 2 strategic goals that they want to accomplish. UGG, like I said, buys grains such as wheat and barley, and they ship that all around the world. Now, because of where they're located, every dozen years or so, they have a drought, and that affects their grain production, and along with about 20% of their company revenue. So it's very volatile, right? So the CEO, Peter Cox, like I said, hired this ERM consultant to help him. Some of his objectives were to decrease their earning volatility, help improve their cash flow, increase their leverage opportunities. The ERM consultant and the CFO started first with identifying all the risk challenges on UGG's balance sheet, and there was about 47 of them total. And then they got together about 20 senior executives, and they started putting together a top 10 risk list. And some of these risks, as you can see on the screen, were the effects of weather on the grain volume, environmental risks, credit risk, commodity price, counterpart exposures, and inventory risk. Now, what they were able to do with that, by identifying those risks, they the consultant and the CFO developed a risk model to quantify the risks so they could do comparisons. And using in-house computer modeling and a bunch of actuaries, they developed the value at risk metrics, which helped them identify a unit of risk. The benefits they saw from implementing the ERM program were as follows. They did increase their cash flow, they reduced their capital cost of capital, they improved their risk profile, they had greater management accountability because people were now responsible and understood what their risk role was in the organization, and they enhanced their corporate governance. Now, integrating ERM and strategic planning. To integrate ERM, an organization's executive or senior management team can follow the following process. First, they need to develop their ERM goals by establishing internal and external contexts. And the first step in integrating ERM program with strategic planning is to consider your goals for ERM as part of the organization's business model. Now, an organization's ERM goals are based on several considerations. One is their risk appetite. Two, they need to ask themselves why their organization is establishing an ERM program. Three, their intent and scope of their ERM program. Four, how ERM will assist the organization in meeting its strategic goals. Five, how the organization will define ERM. And six, whether the organization has a functional or departmental focused culture or collaborative culture and how that will affect their ERM implementation. Now, as an organization sets their ERM goals, this will help guide their decisions that are made in the steps that follow and provide structure within the organization that support assessing the risk, treating the risk, monitoring the risk. So next we're going to talk about analyzing, evaluating, and prioritizing the critical risk. Now, the board and the executive team, next step is to examine the external threats to the organization's mission, strategies, and goals. Now, such threats are identified by noting changes that can undermine the organization as well as their present opportunities that they might be able to take advantage of. One of the key things here is to ask themselves the what-if question, the what-if scenarios, and this is really a very effective method for identifying the risks in comparison to the strategies. Now, each risk to the strategy should be considered because it may affect the organization's success and sustainability. The impact of risk to strategy may manifest gradually rather than having immediate consequences. But by identifying and evaluating any kind of trends that they might have, it's really important in this assessment process. And we kind of covered this in ERM 54. After risks to strategies are identified, then we need to determine what the critical risks are to the organization and determine how the organization is going to prioritize those risks and what risk treatments they're going to start applying. Most approaches to quantifying the criticality include measurements of impact upon the resources and goals of the enterprise and to its stakeholders. Frequency combined with valuation is also a consideration, but a low frequency, high impact risk that cannot be completely avoided requires careful consideration. Now, the next step is how to treat the critical risks based on priority. The first step is finding answers to the what-if questions from the assessment process, and this is an effective way to initiate treatments to address the risks identified. Based on the likelihood of the risk identified, the organization might initiate actions to address a threat or seize an opportunity. The practical techniques for treating risk to strategy can be placed into one of 5 categories, and we discussed this in ERM 54. Are we going to avoid the risk? Are we using an alternative approach that eliminates the cause of the risk or its consequence? Are we going to accept the risk? By accepting the risk, what plans do we have in place to deal with the uncertainty if it occurs? Are we going to transfer the risk, assign the responsibility to a third party? Are we going to mitigate it, initiate activities to reduce the probability, impact, or timing of the risk event to acceptable risk tolerance? Or are we going to optimize and exploit, meaning develop actions to maximize positive consequences to achieve gains? And Eric is going to talk a little bit more about this when he compares traditional risk management to ERM. Okay, so risk to strategies are periodically monitored by identifying the trends, the triggering events, and warning signs during the assessment phase of each risk identified. Reporting may be periodical or it may be exceptional basis, depending on the likelihood of occurrence and the potential impact that the risk might pose. Now, I'm going to give an example. Washington Department of Transportation. You right? Can you help me? Yes? Okay, here we go. This is a really good example. Washington Department of Transportation strategic objectives. Now, I'm going to give a little bit of background before I jump into their strategic objectives. On September 4th, 2007, the Secretary of Transportation for the State of Washington, Paula Hammond, issued an executive order about enterprise risk management. And in that executive order, she states that, quote, Washington State Department of Transportation employees are directed to support the department's efforts to identify, share, and manage risk across all organizations and functions. Now, in order to achieve this objective, Washington State Department of Transportation will support and implement through its managers, supervisors, employees, coordinate ERM rules, standards, and procedures that include but are not limited to the following elements. 1, identification, prioritization of risk on an agency-wide basis. 2, identification, implementation, and monitoring of risks, mitigation strategies. And 3, review and incorporation of best practices into risk mitigation plans. Now, in accordance with Washington State Department's strategic plan, and they're on their 2011-2007, they plan like 5 to 6 years in advance. The department has identified 6 strategic objectives, and I want to go through these. First one is safety, to provide for and improve the safety and security of transportation customers and the transportation system. 2, preservation, which is to maintain, preserve, extend the life and utility of prior investments in transportation system and service. Mobility is the third one, to improve and predicate movement and goods and people throughout Washington State. Advanced here. Okay. The fourth one is environmental, to enhance Washington's quality of life through transportation investments that promote energy conservation and enhance healthy communities and protect the environment. The fifth one is stewardship, to continuously improve the quality, effectiveness, and efficiency of the transportation system. And 6 is the economic vitality, which is to promote and develop transportation systems that stimulate and support and enhance the movement of people and goods to ensure a prosperous economy. Now, one thing that Washington State of Washington has an ERM program, very much similar to University of California. And the next slide here is what the state of Washington gives to all their departments to help them set and develop ERM goals. Now, the first step I really like here is clearly state your goal. Second, what are the obstacles in meeting those goals? Third, evaluate the upside and downside of risks. 4, prioritize your risks. 5, determine proper risk treatment. The next one is capture risk intelligence, and we're going to talk a little bit about risk intelligence and business intelligence and economic intelligence, Chapter 4. And then communicate results to your decision makers. Okay, now taking those ERM goals, or this objective, let me say that again, taking their strategic objectives, one of those 6, the one I kind of want to focus on is their safety objective. And starting off with the first one, reduce fatal and serious injury collisions, that's one of their ERM goals. And their mitigation plan is to add more rumble strips and enhance the guardrails and shoulder embankments. Number 2 is reduce the risk of bridge collapse due to Mother Nature. Well, their mitigation plan is to have seismic retrofits of all their bridges that fall in that high to moderate risk level. And then the third ERM goal they have is prevent, mitigate, and respond to acts of terrorism. Their mitigation plan is to identify areas of vulnerability across the transportation system in the state of Washington, and one area they felt that they need to improve on was their ferry vessel security. Now I want ERIC to speak a little more on the next slide, which is other sample ERM goals.
So one of the things actually I do want to talk about that is it kind of highlights, but it talks about it. When we talk about developing strategic plan, really everything, no matter what organization it is, we're really talking about what's the mission of the organization. And part of this is, when we talk about breaking down the silos, it's trying to identify that every person or every department in that organization supports the mission in some form or fashion. Unfortunately, most departments may not see it. They just see, okay, we just do the accounting. We're just responsible for paying the bills on time. But when you start looking at it from a risk management perspective, through everyone's a risk manager, what are the things that can cause us not to achieve our mission? And so what I'd like to do is, the mission of University of California essentially is, it's an education mission. We have a public service mission and a research mission. So, essentially we want to be able to turn out, provide the best, higher education environment for our students and encourage research. Well, if you look at the departments, what it comes down to is we need to be able to free up money to be able to encourage that research. And some different examples of that, just in a global sense for University of California. And Maria, since you're on the line, I'll kind of use some of the information that may not seem like it's integral, but the CFO division really took a hold and looked at, what are some of the different things that can impair the mission from us being able to achieve that research portion of it. And so when you look at monetary or administrative efficiencies, that's one thing that if we can improve, that actually adds more dollars. There's a cost savings. And so one of the things that the CFO division is looking at is administrative spend, let's say on how many people are getting their paychecks through direct deposit rather than, or some are getting paper form. And essentially, it seems pretty innocuous. Well, why would we want to have metrics on something like that? That's, it's just, people get their checks. But there's a cost associated with printing those checks or their W-2 forms. And essentially with a large enterprise, the number of employees, there's, it's in the millions of dollars in savings, essentially, by becoming more efficient. So essentially, if we can help reduce costs by $5 million a year on this one area, let's say, now all of a sudden, we're helping support the mission, and it's also making those departments and the chancellors and all those other people involved when they start seeing what role they play in helping support that overall mission. And so I guess what I want to try to take out of this is when you look at these overarching, we talk about strategic planning and things like that, it's all nice and we get the warm fuzzies about what our department, we might have department-specific ones. But essentially what all those strategic plans, when it incorporates the ERM portion, it's trying to take what the overall mission of the organization is and then putting those ERM goals behind it to say, what can we do to help support that mission? And so that's kind of the context that I want you to actually take a look at this whole course in, is seeing what those things are. The other thing, I'll give another example since I'm also on a school board, that I think with all of us having, most of us having kids or have the school environment, in the last year in our school, we actually had the 5th grade class, we had an outbreak of lice. And I've been trying to get people to think about ERM, even on our school board, to how we respond to different things. And one of the things that when you look at it, for our mission is to educate, to have the best education system for, K-8 education system to prepare our students so they're ready to go to high school and they have those tools in a world-class education. Now, with that lice outbreak, what happened was we had 2 classrooms. One student came to school, had lice. Well, the next thing we know, both teachers in the classroom somehow it spread, and we essentially lost about 30 average daily attendance dollars. Our students were out, and we lost them for about 3 days. Plus, we had to hire subs, and then we didn't have the right equipment to take care of. The janitorial crew didn't have the right equipment to take care of that. And we had another outbreak a couple weeks later. One of the things we'll talk about is like reputational risk and financial risk and operational risk. Something as small as something like that had a huge impact on achieving our mission as a school district to educate our students, because now these students lost 3 days of education. Other parents kept their kids out because they didn't want to send them back in with the fear of them getting lice. the teachers we lost that are, high caliber, we had to get subs in. So that situation, had we done pre-planning and looked at how do we communicate these type of issues? How do we make sure that, what is a quick response time on those type of things? Because this is a common occurrence, unfortunately, within a school district, and yet because it's not an insurable risk, it's handled differently, and the custodial crew plays a key part. The teachers, the school nurse, all those different pieces are crucial. And had we identified them in a more of an enterprise risk management context, we could have, hopefully had less students out, or maybe we found an alternative classroom for those students so that parents would still send their kids in. That's kind of the idea of risk management. What are the threats of us achieving our mission on something like that? So that's kind of another example. So now going on the slides, the other sample ERM goals: identify opportunities for and threats for achieving organizational goals. That's kind of really what I spoke to, is that, that's really where the advantage of enterprise risk management comes into play, is, it's almost like that SWOT analysis. We need to be able to identify what those threats, they're going to stop us from achieving what we're setting out to do. And having everyone think outside their silos and working together and to kind of identify those risks in advance instead of all of a sudden having to deal with the aftermath without having a correct plan. And anticipate and recognize emerging risks. And I'll talk a little bit more about business intelligence, and we'll talk more in the later chapters about that. Optimize risk-taking by considering risk appetite and risk tolerance. Increase management accountability and risk-based performance management, and design and enhance appropriate management controls to effectively and efficiently reduce defects and minimize loss. So again, using the University of California and looking at these other ERM goals, about 5 or actually 6 years ago, our Chief Risk Officer, Grace Cricket, who really came on board to really take the enterprise risk management program to the next level. As part of that, also introduced a business intelligence system that we use with IBM. And the first one we looked at, just kind of hazard risk, injuries, which is, that's the low-hanging fruit, and so we did that. But now that enterprise risk management information system is also trying to figure out, looking down in the future. So now we're looking at turnover rates. What's our retirement? We're looking at 5 years down the road of the number of the types of people that are eligible to retire. So typically, if you look at retirement, you're more concerned from a dollars and cents of what the pension obligations might be. But the risk also is all that history and the intelligence that goes with it. And so, for example, with the University of California, within our Office of General Counsel, within the next, I think it's 3 years, 40% of our OGC staff is eligible to retire. I mean, that's a huge amount, brain trust essentially that we could lose in a very short amount of time. And I think actually system-wide, or the whole Office of the President where I work, it's around 40 or 50% of the staff is eligible to retire in the next 5 years. So succession planning now becomes part of the discussion. And when I talked about anticipate, when I talk about anticipating and recognize emerging risks, well, for us, retirement is one of those emerging risks that we have to deal with. The use of technology. One of the things, again, from a UC perspective, that we have to look at is online learning, like we're doing now. Are we losing students to other institutions because of the online learning opportunities? And so UC has to look at what those things are to be able to move forward. And then also optimize risk-taking and looking at our risk appetite. Being a research institution, we do a lot of risk-taking. And so there's a lot of mitigation that goes with that. So that's kind of in a nutshell of what we kind of look at on those. And and again, to kind of keep the context, we'll talk about the other things here in a moment. So the what-if scenarios. Christy, did you want to take those?
Yeah, let me go through those real quickly. For example, a competitor emerges into your market. Somebody who's able to come in maybe at low cost, how is that going to affect your organization? Regulators change and double the amount of time needed to develop our products. FDA, let's say, I know my husband worked for Techniscan, which was a company here in Utah, and they had like an alternative way of doing the mammogram. Well, it's a wonderful technology, but they have been having increased problems getting the FDA to approve their new medical device. Consumer demands on greener products. Companies are now, you'll see a lot in the stores now that something like chemical, like a cleaning solution or something is greener and it doesn't hurt the environment as much, and maybe your products are not as green as your competitors, and that could be a disadvantage to you. Our company's unique manufacturing competencies are needed for an emerging product. Favorable exchange rates make our products more competitive. Frost in Florida decreases crop yield for our major competitors. And I know, like last year, I remember going to the grocery store and paying like almost $3.98 a pound for tomatoes because the tomato crop in our region where it supplies the grocery stores had some drought issues and stuff. So, you know, things like that. So, do you want to advance to the next slide, Eric?
Here, I've got it there.
Okay, got
Standard
it.
& Poor's?
Yeah, talk about Standard & Poor's.
Okay. So, obviously, Standard & Poor's is in the news a lot for a lot of different reasons. But one of the things that Standard & Poor's has done as far as a credit rating agency now is, I don't know how long ago, but several years ago, they began to start looking at an organization's enterprise risk management program. So that is part of what they look at with an organization, whether they have it. So what was, I guess it was about a year ago now, when Standard & Poor's came in, they actually took a look at our ERM program, and for the first time ever, they actually made a statement and noted it as a credit strength, UC's ERM program. And so even though there's a lot of other things that help our credit rating, but the idea that having a strong ERM program to look at these emerging risks, and that Standard & Poor's did note that a 0.01% difference for UC with the amount of bonds and other things that it carries has a huge financial impact. When we're talking billions of dollars that we're essentially have credit outstanding, that saves us millions because of that 0.01% difference. And so the idea that more and more organizations are, when Standard & Poor's does the reviews, are going to be looking at this, and so this is an expectation now. So ERM, as much as people think it's a fad in some cases, this is not going away. It's being looked at by these credit rating agencies because they want to really see, do these organizations understand the risks that may jeopardize their financial future? And so that's really how Standard & Poor's is looking at these enterprise risk management programs. And so the questions that are on there, what they're looking at, what are the organization's top risks, how big are they, how often are they likely to occur, and then what is management doing about those top risks, and what size quarterly operating or cash loss has management and the board agreed to is tolerable. So it's, again, of really recognizing what these different things are and how they could have a financial impact, and not putting your head in the sand type of approach when we start looking at the various risks of what could be happening and monitoring those things. Again, it looks more at the financial part of it, but you can look at, let's look at the, was it BP, I can't think of the oil rig out there that basically, had the explosion. You look at the risks of what happened with that and the aftermath. Enterprise risk management, I mean, there's been several case studies now on that disaster, and the impacts that it had not only reputationally, operationally. I mean, there's a huge thing, but and very much so, by all indications, was very much preventable. So that's a good example where ERM, if they had a program, could have played a much better role.
And also, another important thing that I've read the BP oil, the Federal Commission report on BP. They said another interesting thing is, if they didn't use the word enterprise risk management, that they did talk about poor corporate governance and poor risk management, and had Halliburton, Transocean, and BP communicated better, they probably would have avoided some of the, they probably could have avoided this whole Macondo well explosion, but they had poor communication among those different corporations.
And then the other questions they look at: describe the staff responsible for risk management programs and their place in the organization chart. How do they measure success, and how would a loss from a key risk affect incentive compensation of top management and planning? And I think the thing that I sent the article out regarding Forbes to the group earlier, that really what you're seeing is a much more emphasis on more chief risk officers that are reporting to the C-suite or directly to a board of directors, that the importance of risk management is really being elevated more than it has I mean, the advances in the last 10 years of risk management with ERM, even though it's kind of been around for 15, 20 years, it's really starting to take off as being seen as an integral part of business operations. The other questions, what discussion about risk management have taken place at the board level? And then give an example of your company respond to a recent surprise in your industry. How does the surprise end up affecting your company differently than others? And you look at it, and actually, whether they're practicing enterprise risk management or not, it's a risk management technique. But if you look at Southwest Airlines, is another good example compared to other airlines. They were essentially hedging their gas purchases, buying futures, and they were one of the few that did it. And so they were able to remain profitable during a period when every other airline was, they were able to, weigh out the bad times much better than anyone else. And so again, risk management played a key role in that. So to go into the next kind of category of discussion is, difference between traditional risk management and ERM. And essentially, probably the best way to describe it, it's not necessarily on this slide here, but traditionally most people think of risk management as buying insurance. We're looking at hazard risk, and that's the way traditional risk management is viewed. And part of the reason why you're probably, hopefully, taking this course is to really start looking at it from that enterprise level of, we do a lot more, or we can do a lot more in an organization to support the mission, again, bringing up that word mission, to support, when we support that organization. So it's not just about buying insurance, and because we can buy insurance for almost anything. My boss always said there's no there's really no bad risk. There's just bad premium. Essentially, you can just pay a whole lot, and you can buy insurance for anything. You're just going to pay a lot for it, depending on what the risk is. So now, if from enterprise level, what we're really looking at is, the risk category is a little different. So strategic, we're looking strategic, financial, operational, hazard, reputation, environment, compliance, human capital, and technology risk. And some of these sometimes get, like technology, and some of those get wrapped up into the operational. But when you look at the change of pace of technology, all these things, we can have an impact. Traditionally, risk management would only focus on this hazard component. And maybe they might do the financial with some of the hedging. But the idea that now we're looking at strategic and operational, that's important. And I guess the other thing, traditional risk management might have looked at compliance. So now within our universe of what we're concerned about as enterprise risk managers is all these things, which means in many ways we're facilitators because we can't be an expert on all these things, but we need to make sure that people that do understand these risks can bring those to our attention. There's also strategic integration. Traditional risk management looks at pure risk and hazard risk, and ERM takes a much more holistic approach. Again, we're breaking up the silos. And ERM really isn't anything new for most people, but it's, in some places they don't use the term ERM because it's a dirty word. It got a negative connotation. But I think that's starting to change. Performance metrics. How do we measure success? Not just activity-based, but result-driven. So traditionally, within hazard risk, we looked at, did we have a loss? We had a loss or we didn't have a loss? Or how much premium did we pay? What's our X mod? Now with enterprise risk management, we're looking really for opportunities. We're looking for leading indicators. It's much more based on, are we making a difference in, it's not just how many meetings we're having, but what were the results from those meetings? Are we seeing increased productivity? Or in the case of UC, are we seeing more people use an application that helps us save money instead of buying tickets, let's say airline tickets on their own through the internet? Are they using our internal program that we have that we actually get rebate money back on? So those are the types of things that can help us. And then again, the organizational structure. ERM is decentralized and integrated to all levels of the organization. And you've heard me say a couple times now, ERM, another meaning for enterprise risk manager, ERM, is everyone is a risk manager. And to really make ERM successful, it has to be decentralized and it has to be integrated into the operations. And everyone has to understand that they play a key role in supporting that mission. So part of what, as we go through these next chapters, it's going to be looking at how can you take, each of those departments, from a practical sense, to making all those departments and what their function is and helping them see the role they play in helping support the mission. It's just not that they're doing accounts payable and accounts receivable. It's by having those checks on time, by having, whatever the accounts receivable, how often are we, how far out do we have people not paying us? Are they slow paying? Stay on top of those things, because that also has an effect with us. For this slide, again, this is just more of a different way to view it, but again, traditional, we're focused on preventing or reducing potential hazard or operational losses. Whereas ERM, we're again, concerned with a much larger area of risk, strategic, financial, hazard, compliance, reputational, and things like that. Another example I would give is when you think about enterprise risk management, every organization is going to be different on what their focus is. And I'll use the example of, let's say that you're a organization, you're a hotel chain that that has a food service type of operation where they have serve dinners. But then we also may have another, then we have Jack in the Box. Well, if we have a foodborne illness case, reputationally, it's going to be much more damaging, as we know, to Jack in the Box than it would be to a hotel chain, because that's not their core function. It's part of what they're doing to supply it, but their mission is to provide, comfortable rooms, and to increase profit share, things like that. Where, if they took a hit in the newspaper for having a foodborne illness claim, people are still going to go to their hotels. They're just not going to eat there. Whereas a core business function, it's such a key risk that if we had such, it can basically bring down the business. And that's the idea of what enterprise risk management looks at as a good way to do it. So enhanced decision making, the other reasons why we want to do it. And again, the reason why we're covering this is that these are the type of things of, they're going to ask some type of essay question that's going to ask, why do you want to implement an ERM program? So increased profitability. We want to monitor systemic risk inherent to the organization that can adversely affect its long-term financial outlook. Hopefully, if we do our things right, we're going to have reduced volatility because we're going to examine areas that could affect cash flows. We're going to make sure that we have systems in place to, kind of, instead of having the large swings, it's going to be more of a smoothing effect. Improved ability to meet strategic goals. So again, we're going to identify risks that would impede growth and achievement, as well as increased management accountability. And that's where the dashboards and business intelligence becomes so key, is now we can start holding managers accountable for those areas of risk in which they oversee. So it's not just the risk manager anymore that's trying to manage all those things. It's the line management that becomes part of the process, and they're going to be held accountable for their specific function, and so they can see how that comes in there. Management consensus, create a corporate culture that embraces risk as an additional component. Again, I think we're seeing that more. And stakeholder acceptance. Managers understand that the way they manage will have a positive impact on the organization. And again, traditionally we think of managers' risk might be employment practices liability from a traditional risk management sense. But from an ERM, we're looking at how can they improve productivity? What are those things that they can do that has the positive impact, again, to help support the mission? Reduced turnover rates help support the mission. Reduced accidents, things like that will all be part of it. So, Christy, do you want to add anything else before I go on to the next part?
No, you're really good. Why don't you go into the ERM framework and standards?
Okay. So since we're just do a time check, we're almost 6:30, so we're doing good on time. So the other part that's come up is that there's different ERM frameworks and standards, and they talk obviously about this in the book, and we're just going to cover, in a general sense, what those things are. But all in all, they really share the same kind of beliefs, kind of core foundation or framework. And I guess I wouldn't be too hung up on the different frameworks, other than to kind of know, what they're kind of used for, or where they originated from. It's a good kind of historical. But there's a lot of debate that goes on for those that are more in the, like LinkedIn and other discussion groups of what's the best framework. So University of California adopted the COSO framework, and we'll talk a little bit more about that here. But essentially, there's all these different things. It's just which ones do you feel the most comfortable, which one's easier to implement is really, at the end of the day, what it comes down to. So the newest one which I don't know if I'd call it a framework as much. It's the standard, but ISO 31000-2009, which was recently adopted, which is the new risk management standard. And so the scope is to enable all strategic management and operational tasks of an organization throughout projects, functions, and process to be aligned to a common set of risk management objectives. And so this is more the internationally kind of recognized framework that people are kind of globbing onto now. But it really incorporates all the various elements of the other frameworks that we're going to talk about. The BC 31100, the code establishes principles and terminology for risk management, provides recommendations for the model, framework, process, and implementation of risk management. You'll kind of see that all these things start sounding alike. The COSO 2, which is the Committee on Sponsoring Organizations. It's been a while. It defines ERM as a process driven from an organization's board of directors that establishes an organization-wide strategy to manage risk within its risk appetite. So COSO looks at it more, it's a board driven by the board of directors. So that's a nuance there. This is the next one, Australia and New Zealand, 4360. It's intended to provide a broad overview of risk management. Organizations interpret this guide in the context of their own environment. So some are very prescriptive, and what I'll probably, obviously you can read more in the text specifically about it, but what I'll probably end up doing is sending out, it's more of a cheat sheet that kind of, it's a, not a roadmap, it's like a matrix, and you can kind of see where these different programs align, and RIMS actually did a pretty good, it was like a, what do you call it, a catwalk type thing, where you can see where the similarities lie. And almost all of them you'll find that the similarities are pretty, they all have different elements, and just maybe one piece is missing out of one compared to the other. But I'll make sure that I send that out, because that'll give you a better context than necessarily what the descriptions in the book do. FIRMA, standard recognizes that risk has both an upside and a downside. Its components allow organizations to report compliance with best practices. And then Basel II, basically the main thing you need to know on that is that's more of a banking or financial kind of regulation. And it's regarding looking at the amount of capital banks need in reserves. For Solvency II was for insurance firms in Europe. So those two originated in Europe. And Christy, go ahead.
I was just going to say, actually, they're now on, as of this summer, Basel III and Solvency III. Okay. So the book is a little outdated. They are on Basel III and Solvency III now.
So, Christy, just for our purposes, obviously on the exam with the sample questions, how much information did they focus in on the different frameworks? Was there?
I took two different practice exams. There wasn't one question on framework or standards.
Okay, and that's what I had a sense, because it's really looking at the overall. Do you understand ERM in the general sense? And you may be able to, if there was something that said, depending on your industry, it's more just giving you guidance of how these things kind of came to develop, where ERM has come from more than anything else, which I think is really more the key concept, and how it's used and what the processes are, I think is more important to understand than necessarily memorizing, what FIRMA and Basel II or and Solvency III and all those things are. So sample test questions. I'll let Krista. You want to take these?
Okay, I'll take them over. These, like I said, probably the best way to study or get questions from the sample questions is making the purchase and buying the course guide. And these questions are directly from the course guide from Chapter 1. And I like the course guide because it gives you it says, like, what's a utility, and then you have to put the definition and all the answers in the back of each chapter. But if you buy the course guide, work through it on your own, and then go back at the end of the chapter and see if you got the right answers. But here's some of the practice essay questions. Provide an example of upside of risk. Explain how ERM strategic integration varies with traditional risk management. Explain how ERM differs from traditional risk management with regards to the organizational structure. Summarize 2 important benefits of the ERM approach. And then I'll advance the next one. Explain how the ERM approach increases profitability, which we covered tonight. Explain how an ERM approach can result in reduced earning volatility for an organization. Also explain how the ERM process can lead to increased management accountability. And when you're writing these answers, don't spend tons and tons of time writing long answers. You want nice, short, concise answers because the 3 hours goes by pretty quick. So you want to pace yourself. And then here's some other examples. Summarize how management consensus is achieved in an organization utilizing the ERM approach, and describe how an ERM approach will improve an organization's acceptance by internal and external stakeholders. So does that give you a good I hope that gives you a good overview of the type of questions that you'll see from Chapter 1.
And we are going to be sending out the practice exam probably later this week, either tomorrow or over the weekend. And did that already, it had some of the answers on there too, is that correct?
Yeah, I have some of the answers on them. Not every single one, because some of these questions could have more than one answer. And and I've written down some of them, but the grading, I think my grader on my second one was nicer to me than the grader on the first test I took. But it all depends on who grades your test. I'm not one of the graders, so but there is a range of answers for each question.
And I think the best way, so from a studying standpoint, what we'll try to do each week is to cover some of the different questions and maybe talk a little bit more for those that if we, if we can, maybe talk about one of the questions, or if there's one that someone would like to have more discussion on, if you could let us know. Maybe talk about that now, since we do have more time before, so the first class always goes by a little bit quicker because we'd only do one chapter. So we do have a hand up, so let me go ahead and, okay. So Pamela, you're unmuted. Go ahead. Nope. Pamela, you might have mute on your thing. Maybe you can't talk on your keyboard or your computer. Nope.
Do you want to type the question in? Oh.
Yeah, go if you can, Pamela. It looks like I have you unmuted, but doesn't look like your microphone may be working on your computer. So if you would go ahead and type in your question, and we'll go ahead and do it that way. That'll work as well. Is there anyone else that may have a question as well for us to cover or talk a little bit more about? Okay. Looks like we don't have too many there. Let's, in the meantime, how about we cover, maybe summarize the 2 important benefits of the ERM approach. What type of answers do you think, because I know the first one has a whole bunch of upside risks we can name off. There's too many. But what would be 2 important benefits of the ERM approach that you think they might be looking for?
Well, reduce volatility is a good answer. Also increase your profitability is another good answer.
And some of these things may merge into others. Okay. So looks like I've got someone typed in the question. Okay, so can you give the answer for the last question?
The last question of these?
Yeah.
Describe how the ERM approach will improve an organization's acceptance by internal and external stakeholders. One thing that I can think about with this particular question is by internal and external stakeholders understanding, getting the full risk picture, I think you have much more acceptance, especially when you're talking about, well, we're going to talk about this later on in another chapter. What are your internal stakeholders versus your external stakeholders? Okay. But describe how your approach will improve an organizational acceptance. By everyone, like I said, being on the same page, understanding all the risks, you have better buy-in, which we'll talk about in future chapters, because the understanding of not only how this risk can impact maybe you're a manager of a department, not only the risk in your department can impact what you're doing, but it can also impact other areas within your organization. And with that understanding, by doing an ERM approach, everyone's on the same page, they can understand that. So that's the idea of having acceptance, because there's a better understanding of it. Does that make sense?
And
does that answer the question?
Yeah, I'll do the external one. External also can be your suppliers.
Yes.
And so if you have an ERM approach and part of your mission is to be also more of a sustainable type of company, and you know, you can look at how your suppliers, where those things are coming from. If knowing what the of having multiple suppliers, from there's different risk areas, but making sure that, let's say it's linens or other things, that make sure child labor laws aren't violated. If you have all those things up front, knowing that you're going to have controls and accountability of that, and this is what the expectations are, that also puts pressure on your external stakeholders, that they know that if they're going to be doing business with you, here's what the expectations are, and that they're going to be held accountable, and things are going to be monitored with them. And you might want to look at it as even what they're do they, essentially you may want to require them to adopt or report back to you what they're doing from a sustainability standpoint. I think more companies are using the triple bottom line, I think is what it's called.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that.
They have for the sustainability index, really what we're finding more and more is that sustainability is becoming, and actually I think it's even discussed in the ERM textbook, sustainability is really a core function of ERM now. Because almost all companies, and I guess the way to think about it is that if you're a logging company, if you want to be profitable, make as much money, short term you could do that by cutting down a whole bunch of trees. But if you're not replanting and have a sustainable policy to make sure that you can have other trees in the future for forest policy, you're essentially going to put yourself out of business in the long run. And so that's why sustainability is so key now, that all those things, greenhouse gases, what we're producing, it's becoming more and more part of the ERM discussion, is what we're doing in those areas. So, and that's where I really would say that external stakeholders even more, that's probably one of the bigger focuses, is on raw materials, where supplies are coming from. It could also be on fluctuation of prices. And if you have a good process that's looking at not having really stable production, that also ensures that they're going to be able to have stable production on their side, hopefully, knowing that things aren't cyclical because of the way the process works. So that's, again, how acceptance can be worked in there with that type of question.
Well, also, too, with the Japanese earthquake that we just saw this spring, a lot of suppliers that were relying on just-in-time inventory have relooked at just-in-time inventory and said, well, maybe we shouldn't just have one supplier supplying this and this for us, because what if something happens to them? And a good example of that is General Motors had a sensor in their seats, to say that, when the seatbelt was fastened and stuff. Well, who was their main supplier? Was a Japanese supplier, a supplier in Japan. And when the earthquake hit, those little sensors couldn't be shipped over to GM, and so they halted production for, I don't know, a week or so, week and a half or something like that, while they scrambled to find another supplier to give them this little sensor to tell them that the seatbelt was fastened. So there's one other thing, is like looking at your supply chain.
Yep, good. Any other questions before I think that's the last slide. Any other questions before we go? So this is, if nothing else, this is going to be basically the format that we're going to use. One of the things that I would like from you, for those that did participate, is feedback on how this worked out. Usually we do these, when I've done the ARM, I've done them on my own, and it's nice to have another person to partner up with on this, so it makes it a little bit easier. One of the things I think that we will probably try to do in the slides is when we do talk about some of the other concepts, maybe just having a little bit more detail in there for you. And Actually, it looks like we've got some feedback. So that's one thing that we are going to try to do with that is, so when we are talking about something, if we give a list, is making sure that you can also see that, so it's not just memorization or writing down the notes as part of it. I do see we have a question. Okay. And thank you for the feedback for those that just sent, okay, as far as giving examples. And that's one thing we will try to do is give lots of examples. Email address is eyoung@ucop.edu. So EYOUNG@ucop.edu. And Christina, I think yours is longer. What I'll do is I will send it out in email to all the participants, both of our email addresses. And I guess the other thing that I would include is and I think Christina as well, really encourage, feel free to give us a call offline or email. As we do this is the first time, at least I've done the ERM course. Christina's done it before in person. Doing it through webinar is challenging because we can't see you, but we want to make sure that we do everything we can to help support and make this the most, as beneficial as possible, and as well as to tell other people so we can get more people, passing the exam and moving forward with it. So with that, if there's no other questions, okay, the website address, yes, I will email everyone the website address for the ERM study group where all the downloads will be, and so once it's uploaded, I'll do that and you'll get that information as well. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording and we'll